Hello and welcome to this episode of Lights Out, your virtual campfire. I'm your hostess with the mostest ghosties, Sylvia Schultz. The 1930s were a time of great innovation in transportation. Railroads had been around for half a century by that point, but in the 30s technology had advanced to the point that really high speeds were possible. One of these shiny new trains was the Pioneer Zephyr. Its innovation earned it a place in the Museum of Science and Industry upon its retirement. All aboard the Pioneer Zephyr as we go, lights out. On May 26, 1934, a train set out from Denver, Colorado, headed for Chicago. But this was no ordinary trip, and this was no ordinary train. This was the Pioneer Zephyr. Named for the Greek god of the west wind, the Zephyr was a marvel of modern engineering. In the early 1930s, the Great Depression hit the railroad business hard. People just weren't traveling as much as they had in the past, and since the mid-1920s, more people had been using automobiles for their travel needs. Railroads needed to make a comeback. This meant they needed to do two things. They needed to lower their operating costs for passenger service, and they needed to attract more riders with a modern image for the traveling public. One of the railroad presidents who took on this challenge was Ralph Budd. He knew that a modern, efficient, high-speed train design to replace steam locomotives needed to be of a lighter-weight construction, and it needed to be driven by a power system that would stand up to the demands of high-speed service. Ralph Budd teamed up with Edward Budd, no relation, an automotive steel pioneer, in 1932. Together they designed a sleek rail car that suited these needs perfectly. It was made of stainless steel, which meant that it didn't need to be painted to protect it from the elements. It was also lighter than the wood and hardened steel of older train cars. The locomotive's lower center of gravity allowed it to travel both faster and more efficiently than steam locomotives. Gasoline engines just weren't powerful enough for high-speed rail, and four-stroke diesel engines were only efficient within a narrow range of operating conditions, so they weren't suitable for rail transport. Luckily, one of the exhibits at the 1933 Chicago World's Fair was a two-stroke diesel engine with fuel injection. This was the missing piece, and soon the Budds had their shiny new train. And the Zephyr was shiny. Its polished silver skin gleamed, and its streamlined design looked like it was speeding along even when it was standing still. And the interior was just as snazzy. Instead of the old-fashioned wood and upholstery Pullman cars, the Zephyr boasted clean lines, indirect lighting, and colors in soothing pastels, pale green, light brown, and cool blue. Naming the train was something Ralph Budd took seriously. He wanted the name to start with a Z, because this was to be the last word in passenger service. He turned to the dictionary, but Zymurgy, the study or practice of fermentation in wine or beer making, and Ziziva, a South American weevil, just didn't have the right zing. Fortunately, Budd was reading the Canterbury Tales at the time, which mentions Zephyrus, the gentle west wind. So Budd decided to name his snazzy new train Zephyr. The maiden run of the Zephyr was to be a dawn-to-dusk dash from Denver to Chicago. On board were Ralph Budd, Edward Budd, some reporters, some Burlington employees, some members of the public, and a burro. Zeph was donated by a Colorado newspaper, the Rocky Mountain News. Only what they told Budd was that they were sending him a Rocky Mountain canary, so the train's crew had planned enough space for a bird cage. When the burro was delivered, and Bud translated the figure of speech, he said, "Why not? One more jackass on this trip won't make a difference." The crew hastily cobbled together a stall for Zeph in the baggage section and bought some hay. The train made its dawn-to-dusk run on May 26, 1934. A lot of preparation went into this, as it was really a big publicity stunt. The Buds wanted to show off their innovative new train, and they wanted the Zephyr to pull up in grand style at the opening day of the Century of Progress Fair in Chicago. Incidentally, this is when the Museum of Science and Industry opened. Every other train between Denver and Chicago was diverted onto a siding. Track workers checked every foot of the route, making sure that every spike and bolt was safe. Temporary signs were put up to warn the Zephyr's crew of curves that would be dangerous at high speeds. That day, every railroad crossing was manned by a flagman to ensure that traffic was stopped and the crossing was clear. Stations along the route were patrolled by police and by the Boy Scouts. The train left Denver at 7:04 in the morning, and at 8:09 p.m., 13 hours and 5 minutes later, it crossed the finish line at Halsted Street Station in Chicago. It had traveled 1,015 miles non-stop, with an average speed of 77 miles an hour, getting up to 112.5 miles an hour at its fastest. It actually made the trip 1 hour and 55 minutes faster than expected. Other contemporary trains took about 25 hours to make the same trip. The passenger service on the Zephyr was like nothing else people had ever experienced. The upholstered, stylish seats were comfortable, and passengers could order 20-cent hamburgers and hot dogs, or other food from the kitchen. The train even had a staff of Zephyrettes, onboard hostesses who attended to the passengers' every need. By 1955, the Pioneer Zephyr, there were others, ran between Galesburg, Illinois, and St. Joseph, Missouri. It had been in continuous service since that first run in 1934, and had covered nearly 3 million miles. The Pioneer Zephyr pulled into Chicago for the last time on March 20th, 1960. But the Zephyr name was not forgotten. When Amtrak took over passenger rail services in 1971, it named one of its routes California Zephyr. On May 26, 1960, the 26th anniversary of the Dawn to Dusk Dash, the Pioneer Zephyr was donated to Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry. It was displayed outside until 1994. A new display area was prepared inside the museum across from the underground parking area. In 1998, after a full cosmetic restoration, the Pioneer Zephyr was reopened and is one of the most popular exhibits at the museum. The tour begins in the baggage car, which, yes, has Zeph's stall in it. It also has Zeph. An animatronic burro plays the part of the famous Rocky Mountain Canary. From the baggage car you go into the passenger coach. Plaster passengers sit in random seats. They've got speakers built into them so they can make comments about the train and the journey. The last part of the tour brings you to the lounge car. More animatronic figures, humans this time, sit in the wide seats. There's Ralph Budd himself in a 3-piece suit. Over there is his sister, Catherine Wilder, with her young daughter. They're all enjoying the view as the countryside rushes past. And it does. Even though the Zephyr is an obviously stationary museum exhibit, the lounge car gives you a feeling of rapid travel. The floor shakes just slightly, giving you the jostle of a moving train under your feet. And outdoor scenes are displayed in the frosted windows, so your brain tricks you into thinking the train's actually moving. Animatronics are cool and creepy in equal parts. Zeph, and the robotic passengers all used to move. When I was there, they did not, but the exhibit is due for an upgrade. The point is, they have to be turned on to move. But sometimes the figures in the lounge move. Mrs. Wilder has been known to move her head even when the power is off. People have also heard hushed laughter and faint music. We really don't know why there seems to be paranormal activity aboard the Zephyr. There's no real reason for it, unless you count the accident on October 2nd, 1939, in which the engineer and another person were killed. Maybe that's why some residual energy still clings to this train, giving it a slightly spooky vibe in spite of its Art Deco cool. The guide on the Zephyr pointed me to another docent, Meg. Meg was rocking an asymmetrical cut of red curly hair. She told me that the Zephyr is her favorite exhibit in the whole museum. I said, okay, seeing as it's your favorite place, can you tell me if you've ever experienced anything weird here? Oh, all the time, was her answer, given in a cheerful but slightly weary tone. She showed me the pockets of her coat. One of the fun things about the Museum of Science and Industry is that their docents all wear white lab coats with big pockets in the front. "Why do you think my pockets are all ripped out?" she asked. She thrust her hands into her pockets and wiggled her fingers through the frayed fabric at the bottom. She didn't elaborate on how it had happened, and I didn't press her for the details. "I had to have a talk with them," she continued. "I said, 'Look, we're here every day. We came to an understanding, and everything's all right now.'" I hope you've enjoyed this peek at one of the Museum of Science and Industry's most popular exhibits, the Pioneer Zephyr. In the next episode, we'll stay at the museum to check out another exhibit. We're going to take a deep dive into the history and hauntings of a German submarine. The next time we go, lights out.